a proposal that really caught a lot of people off guard, I think, or at least surprised the public. You are backing a proposed income tax on millionaires, provided that it's paired with a corresponding reduction in other taxes, if I'm getting the situation right here.
Right.
So what should lawmakers who may be listening know about your position on the income tax or the millionaires?
Yeah, well, first, nobody should have been surprised. I ran for governor for 18 months, and throughout the state I talked about how regressive our tax system is. And what that means is folks who are very wealthy pay a very small percentage of their income in taxes, about 4%. Almost all other Washingtonians pay about 13% of their total income in taxes. That's regressive. That's not fair. And so a millionaire's tax, which targets a small number of folks whose income doesn't include the value of your home, your income is more than $1 million, you pay, after $1 million, 10% millionaire's tax. At the same time, you're exactly right. I'm insisting that a significant amount of the revenue we bring in as a state goes back in the pockets of Washingtonians. For example, there needs to be a tax break for small business owners. They're the backbone of our economy. I propose that, and frankly, we'll be insisting on that. Also, a rebate back to thousands of Washingtonians in the form of a check they receive to help them out during a challenging time. So those are the kind of things that I'm proposing for how we use that revenue that comes in from putting a tax on the wealthiest Washingtonians.
There are some taxpayers who are concerned that any type of income tax would eventually be expanded to cover middle-class families, most families in the state. Do you support an eventual expansion of such a tax?
No, and I was clear when I announced it, a couple things. Number one, that I would not support and will not sign a proposal from the legislature that allows that millionaire's tax to dip below $1 million. In fact, I'm insisting that the legislation include an inflation clause that basically says that $1 million goes up every year on account of inflation, to your point, so it never reaches lower income or middle income Washingtonians. Number two, I'm open to a constitutional amendment to put that thing and lock it into our state constitution. So I support it being at $1 million, so that 99.5% of Washingtonians never end up paying that tax.
And just one more question on that topic.
Yeah.
The proposed 10% millionaires tax wouldn't bring revenue in until 2029.
Yeah.
Why now?
Why now in terms of proposing it? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one is I don't want to propose a revenue stream that we are not 100% sure we can count on. And let's be honest, this will be immediately challenged in the courts. There is going to be a court battle that will undoubtedly go before our state Supreme Court, and that's entirely appropriate, right, Mike? This thing needs to be decided by the courts. That will take time, and while I'm confident this proposal is constitutional, it's no guarantee, right? So we need to see what happens at the courts. I'm also very confident, in fact, I'm sure there will be a challenge at the ballot box. In other words, there will be an initiative that challenges the initiative, and that goes to the people as well. So there's going to be a whole process. Even if it passes this legislative session, and I think that it will, there's a lengthy process before we're in a position to actually realize those revenues. So that's why we need to pass it this year, and it's going to take a little bit of time before we actually see those revenues coming into the state of Washington, and that we can put money back in the pockets of Washingtonians.
So as the state is facing economic challenges, so are families around Washington, particularly with the cost of housing. You proposed building 200,000 housing units over the next 4 years. With interest rates and construction costs still high, what will it take to lower rent or mortgage payments for families around Washington in the near term?
Yeah, well, this last legislative session, last year, I signed into law a rent stabilization bill, by the way, which is historic for Washington State. I agree with what you're saying. Rents are too high, costs of new homes, affordable homes, all too high. We have truly a housing crisis in our state. Look, I just will add to that, Mike, is we're not alone in that in Washington State. When I talk to governors around the country, they have very similar issues, but we're addressing it. To the legislature's credit, I signed about 20 bills last session to try and make it easier and more affordable to build housing. But you're right, in my proposed budget this year, I go all in on housing investments. I propose $250 million in our budget to build more housing and also at the same time help out folks who are impacted by the flooding as well. So I'm hopeful the legislature will follow my lead on making a historic investment so we can build more housing. The last thing I'll say on this, because it is truly a crisis, when I ran for governor, I heard about this issue all over the state. More public-private partnerships to get that housing built, streamline our processes to make it easier to build housing and less expensive. There's a lot we can do that doesn't cost us a dime. And I just will add that, I've been really pleased that in a bipartisan way, the legislature has worked on this issue, has passed laws. I've signed those into law, and we're going to do more of that in this upcoming session. I'm excited about that.
You're proposing to use some of the carbon auction funds from the Climate Commitment Act to fund the Working Families Tax Credit, possibly even expand that,
Yeah.
if I'm understanding that correctly. Can you walk me through the rationale and how you came to this idea?
Well, it's not really a novel idea. When the Climate Commitment Act was adopted, it provides for specific ways in which the revenue that comes in from the Climate Commitment Act, right, those are dollars paid by large polluters, as you know, that go into this fund. The first thing listed in that law is money can be used to pay for the Working Families Tax Credit. And that's essentially a check that the state sends to working families across our state, anywhere between $300 and about $1,200, depending on your income and the size of your family. So it literally was the first thing contemplated to be funded. Historically, it's not been funded there, but to your first question, we've got a big challenging budget right now, and we're facing a shortfall. And that Climate Commitment Act funding is in a good place. It's solid. In fact, additional revenues are coming in. So to me, it made sense to do what the law specifically allows for, to use those funds, the Climate Commitment Act, to pay for a really important program that puts dollars back in the pockets of Washingtonians. Look, I understand that there's going to be a long discussion with the state legislature about that. If they've got a better idea of how that $569 million can be achieved and spent another way, great. What I'll say is it is not easy. You know, additional cuts I think are really challenging in that budget. I don't support raising our sales tax or our property tax to pay for things. So it's a challenging conversation, but I think it's, given the challenge we're facing right now with our budget, I think it's a proposal that makes sense. I look forward to having further conversation with the legislature.
You've got an eco-conscious populace in Washington state.
Yeah.
You also got people with very high cost of living in Washington state. Do you think the state's climate programs and regulations need more recalibration to adjust for those costs, or is this just a difficult balance?
I guess my feeling is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think we should put this in context. Look, climate change is an existential threat to our country and to the world. You know, science does not dispute that. Number two, the federal government, in that big bad betrayal of the bill that they passed, the budget bill several months ago, massive cuts to moving forward on addressing climate. The good news here in Washington state is, because of the Climate Commitment Act, that the voters overwhelmingly approve with more than 60% of the vote, we have significant funds that go into making us more resilient in the face of climate change. So I think we can do both things. We can make life more affordable for Washingtonians. The fact that we're using the Climate Commitment Act in my proposal to pay for the Working Families Tax Credit is evidence of that. That is literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars back in the pockets of Washingtonians as a result of that Climate Commitment Act. So we can address climate, right? We can move forward on a clean energy economy here in Washington state, but we can also make life more affordable for Washingtonians. We can do each of those things at the same time.
The transportation infrastructure in the state got a boost in the last budget cycle, but again, with cost, the projected revenue forecast for the transportation sector is not as challenging, but it is still more challenging than expected. What's your strategy to prioritize the critical needs in transportation?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, for your viewers, it could probably be a little confusing. Wait a second, you're talking about a budget shortfall, but how are you making investments in infrastructure or in housing? And as you know, we have different budgets. So, for example, our operating budget pays for K through 12 education. For example, that's in a challenging situation. Other budgets, like our capital budget and transportation budget, Climate Commitment Act, those are healthy. And so we can make investments there, and we can't generally move funds back and forth. So with that background, you're exactly right that in our infrastructure, my proposed budget leans pretty heavily into fixing our roads and fixing our bridges. So we have in our state about 342 bridges that are over 80 years of age. And 80 years is the expected lifespan of a bridge. We have neglected our infrastructure for too long, the maintenance, the preservation of those bridges. Same with our roads. We rank as like the worst state in the country for potholes and the condition of our roads. That's from years of neglect. So I literally propose a couple $1 billion to repave our roads and to repair our bridges. This is all across our state. We've got to invest in that, and in purchasing new ferries as well to keep our ferry fleet modernized. So those are big proposals in my budget. I really go all in on those proposals, but our infrastructure has been neglected for way too long, and we've got to make an investment. And you'll be hearing about this in my State of the State on Tuesday, which I'm trying to cut down to a manageable size, is, hey, we got to lean into these investments because they impact Washingtonians all across our state.
Some state workers did not get a raise in last year's budget because they didn't have a contract formalized in time, and they are scheduled to receive, well, your proposal, I believe, they would receive retroactive and future pay raises. Meanwhile, I know there were cuts in many areas at the same time. Again, additional cuts this year. How do you balance labor stability with the challenging budget cuts in other areas?
Well, we have to live within our means. That's number one. But number two, I think we do in Washington State a good job of that. We deeply appreciate our workforce, the state workers who provide services to Washingtonians. And we saw evidence of their incredible work during the flood, by the way, where Washingtonians and state workers really stepped up. So that's just a balance where we've got to make sure, hey, cost of living goes up. Our state workers work hard, and we need to make sure we're recognizing that and making sure they're receiving fair wages for the hard work that they do. They could choose something besides public service and make more money, right? But we need to make sure that they're being provided for in a way that's thoughtful in our budget, and certainly the budget that I propose reflects that.
The state is facing significant growth in legal liabilities related to lawsuits. Can you comment on kind of what's driving that trend, and also if you have a strategy to try to tamp that down?
Huge problem. If you're asking me for a list of the biggest challenges we're faced as a state in terms of our budget situation, this would be on any list like that. So you're asked what's driving that. Obviously, for any complex issue, there's lots of reasons. But I think it's only fair to point out that in recent years, our state Supreme Court has issued decisions that vastly expand the liability of the state in tort cases. There's a cost that comes with that. When that liability increase limits our defenses when there's a lawsuit filed against the state of Washington. And without any question, those Supreme Court cases have magnified the amount of money that's being paid out in court decisions or court settlements. There's little I can do about that, but I think you'll see the legislature grappling with this issue this session, because the amount and scope of that budget challenge is becoming very significant. As we look out to future years, that's going to continue to grow unless we get our arms around that. So I think you'll see a pretty healthy debate on different ideas that we can do to get our arms around that.
You've also made investments in law enforcement and hiring. Can you walk me through the discussions that you've had with legislators about that, and sort of, this is one of your priorities coming in, and it's still a priority now, even though the budget situation has arguably gotten worse.
Yeah, so when I gave my inaugural address exactly a year ago, in that inaugural address, I point out that Washington State ranks near the bottom of number of law enforcement officers we have per capita, right, as a percentage of our population. And look, that's not a place we want to be. So one thing I propose, and in my inaugural address, I said I would not sign a budget unless it included a $100 million grant program for local jurisdictions who do most of the hiring, of course, for law enforcement, as you know, our cities and our counties. A grant program that they can utilize for bonuses, for example, to hire individuals to do law enforcement work in their communities. I'm thankful that with the work, the bipartisan work with legislators on both sides of the aisle, we got that legislation passed and to my desk and signed into law. And Mike, in my conversations around the state this past year, when I talked to local elected officials, when I talked to law enforcement leaders, they're deeply appreciative of that. It gives them more tools and more resources to make that hiring, to keep our communities safe. So I'm proud we got that across the finish line. More work to do, obviously, but getting that $100 million grant program signed into law was an important step forward.
There were notable child care related cuts or pauses in your proposal related to some of the programs that the state has approved in recent years. You've also announced this partnership with the Ballmer Group in another area. Can you talk about the role of private donations to the private sector during Washington's budget crunch?
It's a great question, Mike. I think what I would say is try and keep it relatively short, right? But when you've got a challenging budget situation, you've got to get creative. And I will say that I'm first deeply appreciative to the Ballmers for stepping up, and just to give a sense of scale for your viewers, they have a deep passion for early education, right? To make sure that kids are ready when they walk in the classroom for kindergarten and first grade. And what they're proposing is an investment of upwards of $1 billion over the coming years in those programs. The deal is, we cannot cut any of those programs. They're willing to invest to increase access for working families to get their kids getting that help in their early years and that development, which is so crucial, as we know, for their long-term outlook. And so really it was an honor to work with them to make this happen. You'll see legislation this year, actually, to make sure that we're allowed to accept that gift. I'm sure that will pass and get to my desk. But I think it's an example of the generosity of Washingtonians, the focus on early education, and the fact that even during a really challenging budget situation, we'll be expanding dramatically the number of spots available for young children to get them ready at a young age for kindergarten, for first grade, and their academic life. So it's a real honor to be a part of that partnership and to make that happen.
In a short 60-day session, there's a lot on the table.
Yeah.
Do any of the big marquee bills that are getting headlines right now, for example, the millionaire's tax, any of those seem like a long shot in a short session year?
I guess what I would say is, what I say to almost any group I talk to about legislative sessions are, you can take a bill that is the least controversial, that everybody thinks is a good idea, and getting that bill through a legislative session is a challenge. You know how it works. There are deadlines that come up, and sometimes those deadlines, and there's only so much time to debate things on the floor, and they've got lots of competing things. So any bill is always a challenge. Obviously, a bill like the millionaire's tax, which will have a full debate, can be even more challenging. But on that bill specifically, I'm confident it's going to pass. I'm confident I'll be signing that into law. There's no guarantee, but I think the momentum is there. I think the time is right. In that big bad betrayal of a bill that we saw in Congress just recently, they have massive tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. In fact, it was the largest transfer of wealth in our nation's history from the lowest income Americans to the wealthiest. So I think the time is right. I think the people support it. I think the votes are there in the legislature, so I'm confident we'll get that done. But there's also bills that I support. Senator Valdez has a bill that says you cannot be masked as a law enforcement agent. You cannot be masked out there on the streets. We're seeing what's going on with ICE. It's outrageous what's happening with ICE. Masked individuals in unmarked cars plucking people off our streets. It's outrageous. So I'm excited to support that bill from Senator Valdez, and I'm confident that will get to my desk as well. So it's tough in a short session to get bills done, as you know. But I feel like the legislature is ready to move and to act in what I think will be a historic session.
Just briefly, we've got a little under 2 minutes left here. Any comment on there's an alleged ethics complaint related to previous administrative campaign related staff? Any comment on that? Do you think it's going to be a distraction?
Well, certainly not. I haven't read it, so it's not been distracting me. I haven't read it yet. I've been working on my speech and trying to get down to a reasonable length. So no. And so my job as governor is to stay eye on the prize, right, and stay focused on what's most important. So no, not focused on that, but excited about this session. I think there's a lot of momentum behind these investments in our infrastructure, and that is timely, by the way, because in light of the flooding that we had, which we've not had a chance to talk about, huge impacts to our infrastructure. And
if you want to close this out,
I'll close it out. And our WashDock crews, I want to give them a lot of credit. They cleared 97 roadways from floods and landslides in 4 weeks, often working around the clock. But there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost to that infrastructure as a result of those floods, and that's why I'm hopeful that the legislature will embrace my approach to invest heavily in that infrastructure. It's back to basics for our government, but we need to do it, and I'm confident they'll step up to that challenge.
Governor, thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate your perspective.
Thank you very much.
This was Governor Bob Ferguson talking to us as lawmakers prepare to gavel in. When we return, we will turn to the House and the Democratic leader shaping the agenda there, Speaker Laurie Jenkins. Stay with us.
Thank you, sir.
It's a beautiful evening here in Goldendale, Washington, in the hills above the Columbia River. The sun just went down, the moon's coming up, and we're on Observation Hill looking at the newly revamped Goldendale Observatory. This is the biggest public telescope in the western United States. We own it. The citizens of Washington State, administered by our terrific Washington State Parks Department, actually own this telescope. Most telescopes don't have an eyepiece. They are more designed for cameras and for instrument use. But this one, you as an individual can step up to the telescope and see for yourself what it looks like way out there, and see what a planet looks like, perhaps what the moon looks like, or what individual stars look like. It was developed by 4 individuals many years ago in the 1960s at Clark College down in Vancouver. But they found out that the Weather in Vancouver wasn't really conducive to having a telescope because of the cloud cover so many nights. And on a road trip, they came through Goldendale and decided this was the place. Our Washington State Parks program looks at this as one of the crown jewels of their many efforts to bring Washingtonians into better understanding of the world. To have a public telescope like this available to each and every citizen is quite an accomplishment. The telescope here and the observatory and the whole entire package, it's a very impressive place and one of my favorite places.
True wealth is not what we have, it's what we share. Today, we welcome guests to our traditional homeland with hands raised and hearts open. We are Muckleshoot, Seattle's host tribe. Welcome.
When you go to the State Fair in Puyallup, two things are on your mind. First, the taste of those tremendous cones. Let's go. Secondly, a ride on the roller coaster. This beautiful old coaster, built in the 1930s, now rebuilt a couple of times, it's still just as exciting and just as fun. I remember coming here, I think first in 1956 or 57, and the first thing we wanted to do was get in the line for the roller coaster. It was going to be the best ride we'd ever had. There's nothing like the roller coaster. I've been doing it since the 1950s. The roller coaster is one of my favorite places.
Tariffs in and of themselves are low down on the priorities issues. The water issue is going to be bigger. The labor issue, if you keep having a rising minimum wage, we get priced out. We can't get it out of our product to be able to justify the changeover. There has been small price movements on some of the individual items, but then again, is that tariffs or is that simple inflation? We don't know.
As host of Inside Olympia since 2008, I appreciate the opportunity to conduct in-depth interviews with the state's leaders, from the governor to state legislators, to state agency heads, and beyond. These are often interviews nobody else is doing, and they are an important contribution to the civic health of Washington State. PVW is Washington's unblinking eye on state government. Its presence strengthens the civic bonds of the state. It ensures both visibility and access to the work of the governor and state lawmakers, but also state agencies, various committees, the courts, and so much more. In an era of declining media, PVW's role in strengthening the civic fabric of the state is even more important.
You know, if you ask the average citizen in Washington State about our defense industry and where our locations are, they'll tell you about McChord, or they might mention Fort Lewis or one of the major bases around the state, but hardly anybody knows about Jim Creek. And here we are high in the Cascade Mountains, where one of our most important facilities is located. Started in the 1940s and been upgraded many times since then. This is where we communicate to our military all over the world through an antenna and radio system that's still used today. It's the major communication effort that our military has, and it's located right here in Northwest Washington. The Navy not only protects us, but it's also protected some of the biggest trees in our state. The stump behind me is just one example of something that was logged before the Navy got here. But high in these hills, they've also protected some of our finest old-growth forest. This is Jim Creek, and it is one of my favorite places.
Here in the north end of Bainbridge Island is one of the gems of not only Puget Sound, but our entire state. And that's the Blowdale Reserve. Francis and Virginia Blowdale set out to create a botanical garden. They set out to create a Japanese-style grounds. And you walk through the wooded lands, and across the grasslands and so forth, you'll see all these influences just jump out at you. Blowdale home is now the Manor House, and it's open to the public, and you can tour it today, as well as look at the other very interesting buildings. It truly is a beautiful spot, and it truly is one of my favorite places.
Permission to enter, sir? Come on in.
What could be better than this?
cruising down Puget Sound towards Olympia on the beautiful steamship Virginia 5, the last of the Mosquito fleet. It's a gorgeous day, a beautiful ship, and lots of memories on board this boat. I was a wheelboy on the Virginia 5 in 1958, 59, just as a kid. I can still remember Captain Hardwick screaming at me and telling me I'd never be on course. I learned a lot of lessons in life from him. She was built on the beach in the 1920s over on Vashon Island. In her early days, she carried scouts to Camp Parsons and Girl Scouts down to Camp CL. Had quite an interesting background.
Yeah. So we're just going to keep it on.
We didn't have all that, thank you.
No, you did. So if you want to take, he's got the wheel.
We're all blessed to have this beautiful ship today. It's an incredible look back at what our maritime history was like 100 years ago. The SS Virginia 5 right here on Puget Sound, one of my favorite places.
A stolen car is not worth killing somebody or seriously injuring somebody. It's just not.
You have two arteries that feed blood to your brain. I only have one now.
All blacked out.
With the current pursuit law, you could literally steal a vehicle and drive through a school zone actively at 100 miles an hour back and forth, and no one will be able to do anything about that.
My 12-year-old daughter, Mackley, and her best friend, Kathleen, are victims of the no vehicular pursuit law.
There are common sense things that we know we can do to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them.
I believe that law is unconstitutional, so I will not enforce it.
For the first time in a long time, we have people sitting down and paying attention to the Electoral College.
The sand from...
Just a very short introduction again, so I'll look off and then you'll hear me bringing you in. And then I'm going to use this to try to help me keep tabs on the conversation if it's not distracting, just for time.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Oh, 4, here we go. Welcome back to TVW's live opening day coverage. We're joined now by House Speaker Laurie Jenkins, who will guide legislation through the House during the 2026 session. Speaker Jenkins, thank you so much for your time today. As we kick off the short 60-day session, what are House Democrats' top priorities? And if you have any insight on it, which will be hardest to pass?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here today, Mike. I think a short session like this is generally like a sprinting marathon. So it's very intense for us all. The headwinds that the federal government has created with the tariffs and our H.R. 1 are really the most significant things that are facing Washingtonians this year. There's nothing we can do to stop the tariffs, but I think our focus has to be on doing all that we can to stop federal overreach from coming into Washington state, and then in terms of our budget challenges created there by the federal government, doing everything we can to kind of protect food, shelter, health, safety for the people of this state.
In a previous interview with Governor Ferguson, he mentioned legislation that would prohibit law enforcement officers from covering their face. Is this some of the legislation you're referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. These kinds of facial coverings that particularly ICE is using, they're the things that create distrust amongst our population in law enforcement. What we've got to do is keep on doing the great work that we've done to build trust. I mean, we just graduated, I think, our 300th graduate, or maybe more, from our training academies that we started in 2023. We are really getting great new people into the law enforcement community. But when we see things like masking happening in our communities, it destroys all the good work that has been done here in Washington State.
Governor Ferguson has made headlines with his support for a 10% tax on millionaires, on people that are bringing in more than $1 million per year. He does not support any expansion of the tax. Do you think at this point there's appetite in the House for discussion about this legislation and this legislation with constraints?
Yeah, I think the House has always been really interested in rebalancing our tax code. We have such a regressive tax code where the poorest people in this state are carrying the rest of the state on their backs in terms of taxation. What we really need is to rebalance and make it sure everybody's paying their fair share to help working families and businesses in this state. So I think there's a real openness to discussing this. I think when you talk about rebalancing a tax code, you want to not only bring in new revenue sources, but I think the rebalance part is what can we do to give tax relief in other areas to help, again, that rebalancing happen.
The governor has also said that this, if passed, would bring in revenue starting in 2029, but nothing to cover the immediate shortfall. He's proposed cuts, and there, I believe, some tax preference closures possibly, but he's not in favor of property tax increases at this point, is my understanding, or sales tax increases. Can you talk about what types of tax bills might be under discussion this year, or at least the categories? What do you think have the greatest chances of passing?
Well, I mean, I do appreciate the governor being very clear early on that there are certain things that won't gain his signature. There's no point in pushing those, right? Because in order to pass legislation, you have to have the House, majority of the House members, majority of the Senate, and the governor support them. I think there's any number of tax bills that are likely to be filed both in the House and in the Senate that we will consider. There's nothing that's completely off of the table for consideration, but part of this is just looking at the environment that we're in. We raised taxes a substantial amount last session. So we don't want to, I think, go back in and do things there to even increase those further. So we'll look at whatever members file, and the chair of our finance committee will decide which ones to hear and which not.
What areas seem like the likeliest potential sources for cuts in terms of types of categories of state spending in the budget? What do you think is the most likely target?
Yeah, I do think that about 80% of our budget is set, and we can't reduce it, right? Our constitutional obligation for K-12 education, those constitutional obligations, even though the federal government is slashing Medicaid, we still are required to fund Medicaid in order to participate in the federal program, as we would want to do. So those kinds of things, that and debt service, takes up about 80% of our budget. So those things that are not constitutionally or statutorily protected, I think they're the places where we'll look first. That said, our focus last year was on making sure that we were protecting people's access to food, to housing, to health care. Those are going to be really important things to us. Our kids' K-12 education and public safety are all very important. So that starts to shrink the places where we can really make reductions in this state. But I think we're early on in the budget. The governor submitted a budget that we were happy to be able to see and start working on, but it actually because of the flooding, he put it out at the last possible moment he could. So we're still actually looking through that budget, trying to understand his proposals.
One notable element of that budget is that the governor proposes transferring some of the carbon auction funding generated by the Climate Commitment Act related carbon auctions to the working families tax credit to help fund that. I know that's been a popular goal really on both sides of the aisle, the working families tax credit, but I also know there's strong feelings about where the money for the carbon auctions goes and what it's for. What is your perspective on that? Do you think that's likely to be a source of contention?
Well, I mean, I definitely think it'll be a source of a lot of robust conversation. The Climate Commitment Act does allow funding of the Working Families Tax Credit statutorily as part of the way the funds can be used. So that's an authorized use of the funds. Nonetheless, we have been really focused on using those dollars to make sure that we're reducing carbon in Washington State and carbon output in Washington State. So this is one of the challenging conversations that we're going to have this year, where you have two good things, and how do you balance the funding for each of them and where you want to actually move forward in both areas.
Republicans characterize the current budget situation as a spending problem and say that, with more revenue coming in from year to year, there shouldn't be a budget shortfall. In other words, they think state government's growing too big, spending too much money, and they say no amount of revenue will fix that. What's your perspective on what's happening, and what's your response to that characterization?
Well, I mean, I think that we're providing Washingtonians with the services that they want and they deserve. We saw that a couple of years ago with the Climate Commitment Act being on the ballot and voters saying, no, we don't want to repeal it. We want the Climate Commitment Act. We want the capital gains tax. We want the long-term care trust so people can get long-term care. Washingtonians have supported the programs that we've established as Democrats here in Washington State, and I think that we are highly aligned with the voters in this state. The tariffs, the effect of the tariffs and the instability that's being created by the federal government are really the most serious impacts to our budget at this point, and there's very little that we can do about that. So we've got to make sure that we focus in on the places where we can help create affordability for people in this state and keep these really important programs going for Washingtonians.
What haven't I? We've got about a minute and a half left. What have I not brought up that you think is important to add to this discussion?
Well, I guess I would just say there is really no end to the challenges that the federal government is bringing this state. And, one of the things that we will see now, we just finished some historic flooding in the state, and we will be asking the federal government to help us as we recover from that. I think we'll have strong bipartisan support in that request, but that is a place where we will see whether the federal government is interested in targeting Washingtonians or is actually interested in really helping everyone around this country move forward.
With 30 seconds left, is there another policy area that you think we're likely to talk about when this is all said and done that hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet?
Well, I do think that we're also looking a lot at, this is another place of federal overreach where the federal government is finding ways to get data on Washington state residents and then using that to harm people and discriminate against classes of people. So you'll be seeing a bill, I think, in both the House and the Senate on flock cameras, which are these automated license plate readers, and protecting the data of Washingtonians so that the federal government, we're not trying to prohibit the use of the cameras, but we are trying to prohibit the ability for the federal government to come in and misuse that data against people.
Thank you very much, Speaker Jenkins. We will have to leave it there. That was Democratic House Speaker Laurie Jenkins speaking with us as the Democrats set their agenda for the short session. Coming up next, the House Republican perspective from Representative Drew Stokesbury. Stay with us.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Speaker.
Here in the north end of Bainbridge Island is one of the gems of not only Puget Sound, but our entire state. That's the Blowdale Reserve. Prentice and Virginia Blowdale set out to create a botanical garden. They set out to create a Japanese-style grounds. And you walk through the wooded lands and across the grasslands and so forth, you'll see all these influences just jump out at you. Blowdale home is now the Manor House, and it's open to the public, and you can tour it today, as well as look at the other very interesting buildings. It truly is a beautiful spot, and it truly is one of my favorite places.
Well, here we are in the beautiful Puyallup Valley.
How do we make Washington more affordable? We've heard a lot of fingers from the other side of the aisle getting pointed at politicians in Washington, D.C., blaming tariffs and things like that. But the truth of the matter is, life in Washington is uniquely unaffordable compared to nearly any other state. We have among the top 5 most expensive gas prices, housing prices, grocery prices, food prices, childcare prices. Washington is far more expensive than almost any other state, and that's a result of policies passed in this Washington, not the other Washington. And so House Republicans will be working on 2 things. One, how do we stop passing bills that continue to make life more affordable? And 2, how do we begin to unwind some of the things so that maybe food can go down in price every once in a while?
At this point in the session, before it's actually gavelled in to begin, are there any bills that you could talk about from House Republicans that would specifically lower the tax burden?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 2 in particular that get at some of the most critical components of a household's budget. One is what tax folks call prepared food. When you go to the grocery store and buy groceries, which is raw ingredients, right, like salad or apples or a box of cereal, that's been exempt from sales tax for years. But when you buy prepared food, which actually sometimes happens at the grocery store too, like if you go to the salad bar or the deli and get a sandwich, but also anytime you go to Starbucks or McDonald's or Jack in the Box, you're paying sales tax on that. Washington doesn't only have one of the most expensive grocery prices in the country. We've also got the most expensive prices at national restaurant chains like McDonald's and Jack in the Box and Burger King. Food is unaffordable no matter if you're going grocery shopping or trying to get fast food between kids' sports practices. So we want to repeal the sales tax on prepared food to align with how we've already repealed it on groceries. We also want to identify some of life's essentials that everybody needs, but that make up a disproportionate share of working families' budgets. So one of the items we've identified is diapers. New families have got to buy diapers. There's not a great alternative. We should exempt diapers from state sales tax.
The governor has proposed a 10% tax on millionaires, basically an income tax on revenue, annual income above $1 million, with some conditions. He wants to see corresponding tax reduction in other areas, and also some protections to prevent expansion in the future to, say, lower income households or middle income households. What's your perspective on that discussion, and do you think that we will see robust debate on that this year?
Well, first of all, nobody has proposed a bill, so there's no way of knowing who the income tax would hit, and there's no way of knowing where that money would go and what other taxes would be reduced. No way of ensuring protection that it's only going to hit certain people. So, Democrats need to start introducing bills. Second of all, I would say that while the governor has said he would look at ways to reduce other taxes and protect that tax from expanding, I've not heard a lot of Democrat legislators share those opinions. I'd point out that economic data is very clear that states without an income tax are doing phenomenally better than states with an income tax. Washington loses about 50 residents every day. Other states without an income tax are gaining residents. But if you compare all states without an income tax to states with an income tax, no income tax states have faster growing population, they have faster growing GDP growth, faster growing job growth, and most importantly, faster growing personal and household income. So the data is clear that if we can avoid an income tax, the state will grow, our state's economy will grow, and families' incomes will grow. We see that across all the other states that don't have an income tax. But probably the most important thing is that while the governor and legislative Democrats are saying this is a millionaire's tax, it's a millionaire's, if it passed, it would be a millionaire's tax today, but eventually it would be a tax on regular people like you and me. Folks need to think back how many times they've gone to the store or gotten a letter in the mail that have said their taxes are decreasing versus how many times they've seen Olympia raise their taxes. Olympia has raised taxes hundreds of times. They have rarely, if ever, cut taxes. So it might be an income tax on millionaires today, but it's an income tax on you and me tomorrow.
Some proponents of an income tax argue that the voters have signaled they're open to more progressive taxation. They point to the defeat of the initiative, which would have repealed the state capital gains tax, and also just say, that's it's been a long-term goal. Do you think that's true? Has the voter base changed since many income taxes have been defeated since the first one was proposed in Washington?
Yeah, I've lost count at the number of times the public has rejected an income tax, but I think it's about 12 times, including as recently as maybe 10, 15 years ago, voters soundly rejected an income tax, even one that was targeted on high earners. So I think the public is clear they don't really want an income tax. They rightfully don't trust Olympia Democrats to hold their word that it's only ever going to be a tax on millionaires. I think the public has a right to be skeptical. Some of my Democratic colleagues have even acknowledged publicly that it's going to be impossible for the public to trust that the legislature won't raise the income tax to apply to other people. So I don't think the public wants an income tax. I've not heard from many constituents that say they want it. I've heard from far more who say they don't want an income tax. Every time it's been put on the ballot in the last 100 years, an income tax has failed. So I don't think it's something that voters want.
If there were to be a bill that comes out to create one, would you rather it be to have a constitutional amendment, a referendum vote on it, or just a majority vote?
I'm opposed to an income tax no matter what. I think the economic data is clear that, like I said a minute ago, states without an income tax have faster growing population, faster growing economic growth, faster growing job growth, and faster growing personal income growth. So I think it's just bad policy no matter who it applies to. However, I think if Democrats were serious, that their starting position would be a constitutional amendment to lock in who it covers, and they would have a dollar-for-dollar reduction in other taxes. If Democrats aren't willing to make it part of the Constitution, and if they're not willing to reduce sales tax for every dollar they raise in income tax, I don't think it's a very serious proposal.
What areas do you see for the biggest opportunities for bipartisan cooperation?
I'm hopeful that there can be a lot of bipartisan cooperation around making Washington more affordable. I mentioned a minute ago that Republicans will be proposing bills to eliminate the sales tax on prepared food, eliminate the sales tax on diapers. It's actually something that Governor Bob Ferguson has talked about a little bit so far this session. He's also floated the idea of a sales tax reduction or elimination on diapers. So I'm glad to see him following Republicans' lead there. The other thing that Republicans have proposed the last couple of years is to use some of the windfall we're getting from the carbon tax, which is one of the reasons Washington has among the highest gas prices in the country. Use some of that to fund the Working Families Tax Credit, which is a targeted reduction to give a tax credit to working families. That's been a Republican idea for several years, to use the carbon tax money to fund the Working Families Tax Credit. Governor Ferguson's budget proposal, while there's a lot of things that I don't support in there, he does include that proposal. So I'm hoping that those are some ideas. The governor has already signaled alignment with House Republicans' position, hoping legislative Democrats will follow suit as well.
So we've got a couple of minutes left here, but I want to get to some of the issues that you think are likely to be the biggest points of contention within your own caucus. Are there differing opinions on some of the bills that are some of the current discussions coming out among Republicans?
I'm sure there are. We've got 39 Republicans in our caucus that represent different corners of the state, have got different life experience, family experience, professional experience, different backgrounds. But we're pretty united on the things that count. We're pretty united on making sure Washington becomes a safer place to live. Pretty united on wanting to take care of our kids, both those in the K-12 system, those that are under care of the state, like through the foster system, and most importantly, united on trying to make Washington more affordable and opposing the Democrats' really costly initiatives the past couple years that have made Washington less affordable.
With less than a minute, if you could, just address any areas you think would be good fits for cuts moving forward, and also wrap us up with closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing Washington has to do is attack the structural deficit problem. When we met for your viewers, exactly 1 year ago on the first day of the 2025 session, we talked about a looming $5 or $10 billion budget deficit. The legislature raised taxes by $10 billion to balance the budget, and once again, we're back here 1 year later with another multi-billion-dollar budget deficit. Every year for the past several years, the legislature has passed a budget that spends more money than it takes in. The budget balances based on money we have left over from previous years, but we know it's structurally unbalanced. We've got to attack that. We've got to find programs that aren't working and reduce spending in those areas so we can double down on the investments that do work.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Representative Stokesbury. We do appreciate your time. That was the House Republican leader. Up next, we head to the Senate and hear from Democratic Majority Leader Jamie Peterson. Stay with us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good to see you.
And bring the kids. This is an incredible location and a great place to visit. It truly is one of my favorite places.
This is one of the hidden gems of our state of Washington, a location where a wide variety of organizations and groups of all kinds of ethnic and racial backgrounds have enjoyed one location together. a spot where they could come to see their favorite performer, or perhaps could come and listen to a lecture, or just enjoy a Sunday afternoon of dance and family gatherings and fellowship. This is a beautiful location, located in one of the small valleys in the central area of Seattle. It's been here since 1908, and it truly is one of the gems of the state of Washington. Washington Hall became one of those locations in our state where any ethnic group or any racial background, no matter who you were, you could come and rent the location. Can you imagine if you were here the night that Jimi Hendrix did one of his first performances? Count Basie performed here, Billie Holiday was here, Marian Anderson, you go down the list. The Danish Brotherhood built this hall for the enjoyment of all. They used it as a lodge and a gathering place for dances and family activities, but so many other groups have as well. The Jewish community, the Scandinavian community, the Eastern European community, the Ethiopian and African community was owned for a while by the Sons of Haiti, then passed on to historic Seattle. And they've done a magnificent job to restore this location. It's a tribute to everyone who ever lived in the area or came here to watch a performance. All of us must express our appreciation for the restoration of Washington Hall. This truly is one of my favorite places.
Watch all of TVW's award-winning shows on your time at tvw.org.
The House will be in order.
Every year, Washington's legislature meets in Olympia to make decisions that affect you. You voted for them.
The Speaker has opened the roll call machine.
They're voting on issues that matter. But you can't always be there. That's where we come in. For over 30 years, TVW has brought you live, unfiltered coverage of your state government, 24/7, 365 days a year. Every vote, every bill, every debate. Don't rely on headlines or sound bites. Be your own watchdog. Watch your legislators in action wherever you are. Your voice matters. Your government matters. And TVW, we've got you covered every step of the way. And we're not going anywhere.
Here in the International District of Seattle sits the historic Panama Hotel. The hotel was built in the early 1900s. This spot was quickly a focal point for the Japanese community because it had baths, communal baths like they had had in Japan.
interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese surprise attacked Pearl Harbor and devastated most of our fleet. The President and the entire Congress was in total disarray as to what to do next.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live
Yep, ready to rock. Almost there. 5 seconds. Welcome back to TVW's live opening day coverage to kick off the 2026 legislative session. Joining me now is Democratic Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson, who will help steer the Senate's agenda in the 2026 session. Majority Leader Peterson, thank you for your time this morning. To start this interview, could you just lay out the top priorities for the Senate Democratic Caucus for 2026?
Absolutely. So our number one priority is to try to protect the people of Washington against hostile and malevolent federal government. You know, that's playing out in all sorts of different ways, from the immigration enforcement that we're seeing with people shot and killed around the country by agents, to the attacks on medical care and on food assistance for vulnerable people, to the attacks on our research institutions, the University of Washington, Washington State University, the Fred Hutch, almost every different way that you can think of, the tariffs and the damage that that's doing to our agricultural industry. We are trying to figure out how we can protect people and keep them safe from the federal government. So that's number one. Number two, we have our own budget challenges, in some cases that are exacerbated by the actions of the federal government. And so we're going to be working hard to get our budget in balance for this session, and then to set ourselves up for more success in coming sessions. And then third and finally, we are concerned not just about our budget, but about the budgets of our constituents. And so we're going to do everything that we can to try to lower expenses for child care, for health care, for housing, continuing the work that we've been doing over the last several years, as well as energy prices. So a broad affordability agenda and lens that we're going to try to apply to the work that we're doing.
Given that there is a budget shortfall again this session, what strategies seem like good opportunities for your caucus to accomplish those goals without as much money in the budget?
Yeah, so there are a lot of policy opportunities that we have in terms of the federal government response, protecting data of our citizens, outlawing the use of masks by law enforcement, joining with the other West Coast states to do our own, make our own decisions about vaccinations. So those are some of the kinds of things that we can do really without any investment of dollars to help out with the federal government response. In terms of our own budget, we have both a short-term issue in terms of the current supplemental budget, and we're working closely with the governor and with our partners in the House to try to make the nips and tucks that we'll need to make to bring that budget back into balance. In the longer term, I think the thing that I'm most excited about is the possibility of this millionaire tax that we've been talking about, and using some version of that to provide an opportunity for our most successful and wealthiest neighbors to contribute fairly to resolving the problem and rebuilding our safety net, funding public schools, and then also some broader tax relief for most working people in the state.
The governor has said while he supports the 10% tax on people earning $1 million plus per year, he does not want to see that expanded to eventually cover, say, upper middle class, just average families. Would you support controls and constraints on such legislation, maybe even in the form of a referendum or a constitutional amendment? Do you think there's much appetite for that?
I don't think that there's any path to getting bipartisan support for a proposal, and so I don't think that there's really a path to a constitutional amendment. Look, we have not been able to have a conversation in our state for the last 90 years about taxing high earners in any serious way in the legislature since the 1933 Supreme Court decision. The only thing that's in front of us right now is this proposal. Any changes to that would have to go through the exact same public discussion process, the same legislative process with public hearings. But that we're a few years away from when that would happen. That'll be a different legislature making those decisions. So I think it would be premature to try to limit what conversation we could have at that point.
In terms of making life more affordable for the average Washingtonian, what strategies are in place to do that this session?
Yeah, so part of it is that we're going to be taking advantage of this really dramatic gift by Steve Ballmer and the Ballmer and Connie, his wife, in the Ballmer Group, that's going to fund 10,000 early childhood education spots, some child care spots for low-income people over the next 10 years, right? That is a gigantic move for them. Their ask in return for that is just that we don't go backwards in terms of the ECAP program, the Early Childhood Education Assistance Program. So, I think that's one example. We're going to be working very hard on trying to undo the damage that the federal government has done to the stability of the healthcare system, because I think one of the reasons that we've been so effective in controlling healthcare expenses in our state is the dramatic progress that we have made on lowering the rate of uninsured people, making sure that people are getting their health care from a primary care provider and not in the emergency room. So we'll be intensely focused on trying to make sure that safety net continues. And then we're going to continue to work on housing supply. Senator Alvarado has a really interesting proposal that she's worked on with the Business Roundtable about putting dense residential housing into areas that were zoned like commercial, like strip malls, and that has the potential to open up a lot of new area that could be developed for residential housing, bringing down the cost of housing.
Does your caucus, or are you of the opinion that more revenue is needed this year? And if so, where's that likely to come from?
Yeah, you could have a philosophical debate about whether more revenue is needed. The reality is that there's no significant revenue that we can get to happen in time for the fiscal year 27 budget. Fiscal year 27 starts in 5 months and 10 days or something, right? So nothing major can come online in that time frame. So we are going to have to resolve the current budget largely through a combination of transfers and cuts. There may be some small things around the edge, for example, raising the cigarette tax, which we had discussed last year but did not do. But I do not expect any significant new revenue as part of the package to get our budget balanced this year.
If we could jump back a few years, historically there have been some differences. There are fundamental differences in how the House and the Senate are organized, and then in the past the caucuses have had arguably more significant differences in philosophy. I'm not sure. Are there significantly different philosophical shared ideas in the House and Senate these days, strictly for the Democratic caucuses in those two?
I would say that Speaker Jenkins and Representative Fitzgibbon and I are in very regular communication, and from what I can tell, the agendas of our caucuses are almost 100% aligned. Now, we're talking about 59 members on their side and 30 on our side, so obviously you've got individual people who have some ideas that probably diverge, which you would hope, right? That's what helps make good policy in a robust environment for political debate. But in terms of the big picture, I think we are very much aligned, and we're proud to work closely together.
Republican opponents to the proposed income tax on millionaires argue the voters have rejected income tax many times at the ballot. With about a minute left and answering this question, then folding in your closing thoughts, do you think that's changed? Is the electorate ready for an income tax?
We're going to find out, but I think the answer is yes. I think the passage of H.R. 1 this last year by the Congress, juxtaposing huge tax breaks for billionaires and millionaires with benefit reductions, cutting health care and child care and food assistance for poor people, has really heightened awareness of how upside down our tax system is. And, I guess I'll just say there hasn't been a proposal like this in front of the voters. We'll find out what they think.
Well, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Again, that was Senate Majority Leader Peterson, and when we return, we will hear from the Senate Republican Leader, John Braun. Stay with us.
Drive down the freeway near the Columbia River in the town of Woodland, Washington, and we see that big green sign that said Hilda Klager's Lilac Gardens. And we say to ourselves, someday I'm going to stop there. Well, I would urge you to stop. It is simply an incredible spot right on the Columbia River. Hilda Klager was an immigrant from Germany who loved flowers, and she learned to hybridize lilacs at an early age. She created all kinds of new varieties and gave them to her friends and named them after her associates and some of the towns along the river. And time went by, and she had Lilac Week and Lilac Days, and people would come to this little farmhouse and they'd see the lilacs all through the yard. And then disaster struck. After the war, the Vanport flood did a terrible amount of devastation along the river. She was lucky her house was saved, big trees were still in the yard, but all the lilacs washed away in the flood.
ready to go? Hey, Mike, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And welcome back to our final segment. Joining me now, Senate Republican leader John Braun. Senator Braun, thank you for your time today. What are the top priorities for the Senate Republican caucus in the 60-day session?
Yeah, so you've heard us talk in recent years about affordability, public safety, education, issues with children in our state. Those are all still top issues for people we talk to around Washington, but by a large stretch, affordability is pulled away. So I almost say it's affordability, affordability, affordability. Folks are increasingly worried about just the cost of living here in Washington. Food, gas, housing, childcare, healthcare have all been driven up by Democratic policies over the last several years, and to the point where it's really getting hard for people, struggling to pay their bills and to meet the basic requirements of living here in the state of Washington.
In terms of the tax proposals that have been discussed heading into the session, which are you most focused on?
Well, I mean, I think it's the wrong time for any type of tax increase. We just had the largest increase in taxes in our state's history by nearly a more order of magnitude. State and local tax increases nearly $13 billion over the next 4 years. Prior to that, probably $1 or maybe $2 billion was the most we've ever seen. So this is a big increase that's really causing problems for affordability across the state of Washington. The one that worries me the most, simply because the people of the state of Washington have spoke out so often and so negatively about it, is the idea that the Democratic majority is going to put in place an income tax. It flies in the face of a nearly 100-year-old precedent, flies in the face of 10 votes of the people to say no, 11 if you count the initiative of the legislature that they sent 2 years ago, that the legislature nearly unanimously approved. So I think that that is the one that is most at odds with the will of the people of the state of Washington.
In a 60-day session, do you see that passing?
I think it'd be tough. This is even if we thought it was a good idea, which we very much do not, this is a very complicated piece of legislation. When you do that, if you're serious about actually improving the level of progressivity in our tax system, reducing regressive taxes, you got to actually not just put that in place, but also take away taxes. I don't think there's any preparation to do that. The budget, current budget situation doesn't really make that easy. But on top of that, it's a difficult policy to get it right so that we don't harm our small businesses. We actually haven't seen a bill draft of what the Democrats are proposing, but what they've talked about makes it very much seem like this is aimed at small and medium-sized businesses and will put them at a significant disadvantage to businesses in other states. We also have to deal with businesses in our state that do business across state lines, and therefore, how do you deal with apportionment? Who pays tax when and to who? These are very, very complicated issues to get right if we want to do it in a way that doesn't do harm to our state's economy. Let's be clear, our state's economy is already sort of on the ropes. The last thing we need is another big hit like this.
Are there bills in your caucus that would, in the short term, make life more affordable?
Yeah, there are a couple things that are out there. One is a pretty straightforward one, and one you might think is odd, but because the voters approved the cap and trade system at the ballot box last year, but that is driving a lot of the cost of living, nearly 70 cents a gallon in gas prices, and of course, as you add in transportation costs, that affects the cost of everything. So one bill that's out there, I think has already been dropped, is to just pause it for 6 months, give folks to get their feet underneath them, and allow us to adapt to these very extreme and frankly regressive taxes the Democrats put in place last year. So that's a simple one that I don't think we try not to be at odds with the vote of the people, but also give some relief to folks who are struggling.
Given the budget picture that's out there, what do you see as the most likely areas for cuts?
So I don't think there's a one area. When you talk about good budgeting, and I worked on the budget for many years, you rarely find that one single magic, change of your savings or reduction that fixes the problem. It's almost always, looking at the growth curve over time for the core services we provide: education, medication, incarceration. Those are kind of the three big things we do. Look at what we're doing and what's growing faster than inflation, what's growing faster than revenues, and see why is that, and what we can do, what policy we can change to get after that. Most importantly, I think we got to look back at the budget and say, where are we delivering beyond the basic services of state government? Where are we going beyond the priorities of government? You used to hear a lot about that, back in the early 2000s, even prior to that. The priorities of state government. What can we do that nobody else can do? What do we have to do? That's our responsibility, to take care of the vulnerable, etc. Where have we taken that and gone beyond so that we're providing something extra? I think that's where you start to look at places where we can bend the cost curve over time. But I think it's super important we do that by maintaining core services, particularly on vulnerable.
Going back to the income tax proposal, some proponents of an income tax argue that voters have signaled they're open to it by rejecting the capital gains tax repeal in previous years. What do you think?
I think there's a large difference between a capital gains income tax and a regular income tax. I think the more recent, in fact, as I said, there was an initiative to the legislature, passed by the legislature, that came with, I think, nearly 500,000 signatures, basically nearly was that 25%, not quite 25% of the voting public signed that and said, we want this. I find it hard to believe that all of a sudden, after years and years of rejecting the income tax at the ballot box, the voters have changed their mind. I think the key thing when you look at that is are the Democrats so sure this is what people want that they're willing to keep, if they go forward with this, that they keep an emergency clause off of it so it can go directly to the people in the form of a referendum. So they get to weigh in on the bill just like the legislature weighs in on the bill. That's the right way to figure out if you're going to do it, and I don't think you should do it at all, I want to be clear, but if you're going to do it, that's how you make sure that we truly capture the will of the people.
Some of your Democratic counterparts in previous interviews today have mentioned bills that will be coming this year to ban the use of masking by law enforcement and to regulate flock camera usage to prevent the imagery from being able to be shared with the federal government. From a public safety perspective, what's your take on those ideas?
Yeah, I think this is a very situation-dependent issue. I think we have to be very aware that our law enforcement officers in Washington State and federal law enforcement officers have been under attack. Their lives have been threatened. They've been doxxed. I think that we need to be respectful of their privacy and make sure that they aren't and their families aren't subject to additional physical threats. I think that's why you see masks. Masks aren't a new thing in law enforcement. They've been used selectively in individual circumstances. I think you got to be very careful of that. Some reasonable restrictions I think make sense, but doing it in the face of violent threats to our law enforcement, I think is a bad idea. We already struggle here in Washington where we have the lowest number of law enforcement per capita in the country. It meaningfully contributes to the level of crime in our state that is still at historic highs. We're having trouble recruiting in law enforcement across the state. I think we need to be very careful that we don't send a signal that law enforcement is no longer valued and that we are okay with physical threats to law enforcement and their families. That's a bad idea, and we should push back on that.
We've got a little under 2 minutes left here, but Senator, I want to get your perspective on the growing legal liability the state of Washington's consistently having to pay or paying out related to lawsuits now. Any strategies to deal with that? What do you think is driving that?
Well, what's driving is the state has not done a good job of looking after folks in their care, whether it's elderly or developmentally disabled or children, particularly children at risk, either involved in the child protection system or involved in foster care we have failed repeatedly, and I think that's where you start. You start by saying, how do we do a better job and make sure we keep folks in our care safe and in good shape? And because when you think about the number, now nearly $500 million this last year, that's a big number, and certainly in a budget context, there's a lot of things we could do with that money, either to give it back to taxpayers or spend it on more valuable services. But the starting point is the harm that is behind that, Let's fix that first. And then we can deal with other items that will make the process go better. And don't get me wrong, I'm certainly in favor of some level of tort reform. I find it hard to believe that my counterparts on the other side of the aisle are truly interested in that. But if they are, I'm certainly interested. But we got to start by not doing any more harm to the folks in our care.
Senator Braun, I'm afraid we're out of time. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That was the Senate Republican leader, and that concludes our Sine Die live opening day coverage. The legislative session is scheduled to officially begin around noon or shortly thereafter. The impact returns Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Be well.
All right.